is Valerie McKinnon. Born as a surprise under the auspice of the cradling Douglas fir forests of Seattle, I spent my formative years, indulging in interiority. Raised by a teacher and a writer who both couched their personal expressions in poetry, Val chose means of articulation through drawing and painting, as well as more stringent academic intellectualizations.
Chris, can we close the door?
By way of Colorado College and through her introduction into a hearty and warm philosophical dialogue, Val found herself approaching the transition from questioning who I am to, as Helen Sissou asks, who are I? In moving to New York, Val daily encounters the limits of personal contact and yearn for connection, conversation, confluence, and conversion. There's a tension between language and art that comes in her consciousness as the gatekeeper between self and other. Val hopes to explore that tension and perhaps find its release in collaboration during this conference. So welcome Val, who will be talking about the factual delimitation and translation through modes of expression and experimental drawing exercise.
Yeah, I'm not actually sure how, to what extent that title applies.
We'll make a new title.
Yeah, okay. We'll see what after. So yeah, I wanted to do the drawing exercise to really be the main focus of the talk, but I do have a little thing that I'm just going to read. So, the first thing when I started writing was I was thinking about addressing how fundamentally odd the conference setting is in an attempt to discuss conversation, because it kind of repeals a fluid braided voices, and I think that actually hasn't really happened in this setting yet. I think it hasn't been one person making a speech, but each of us up here, alone has attempted to draw out some meaning that we hope to convey. All of the presenters sort of had a motive, I think, and we're left really only with the participation of each of your eyes and your faces to signal that what we've shared is not lost. Especially the signifierness in your faces is precisely what I'd like to explore, to examine what occurs in conversation in tandem with language. Do you guys know about the McGurk linguistic exercise, where it's where a face is shown that mouths ga, 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 the syllable, but instead of the mouth saying ga, 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 there's a voice that says ba, 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 and when you view it, when you see it, most people, it's like a really common thing. Most people see it or hear it as da, da, da. It's just this very odd thing, and if you see them isolated, you can tell the difference. But when you see it all together, it just alters the way that our sensory input works. So that's not really. It's kind of a pedestrian example of what I wanted to show, that our facial gestures influence our understanding of utterances, and that these micro expressions of the face conveyed in a glance that you as a subject don't notice in yourself, but which are read by others, that those expressions shift moment to moment, and in their shifting hold meanings of their own, whether or not they're part of our consciousness. So in a sense, even the singularity of a speech in this setting, I think we're all able to engage in these little moments of expression with one another. We gaze at one another, and in doing so, we encounter the limit of ourselves. In conversation, we come to transcend at its highest moments an internal entrapment. We can come, in a sense, to gaze on ourselves in the moments we are seen by others. Yet there are limits to what we can convey in any language, and there are issues of translation. Our faces are apparitions to ourselves, but they betray to others the fundamental fact of our existence. Those eyes that sparkle, the flush of skin, the curve of one's brow as it knots in concentration. We express so much through our faces. What could a conversation unfettered by the embarrassment of knowing you're being actively seen, actively observed, give to an understanding that we have of ourselves? So to examine this, I'd like to propose an experimental exercise in pursuit of an exploration of that level of self-expression, and in examining the gaze we cannot ourselves see, come to understand what is beyond our consciousness and maybe beyond being as we understand it, where our subjectivity may yet still have some tacit voice in our conversation. And I'll explain the nature of the exercise in a moment. But I kind of wanted to go further into the issues of translation and of being and self and other, subjectivity, just playing around with subjectivity. So, in conversation, we express ourselves not only in involuntary facial expression, but in ways not closed down by our blindness of ourselves or in something that perhaps is tacit or passive. We can express ourselves through language, and we express ourselves through art. But can the primary expression of our face, the one aspect of what we project individually, which we ourselves can't really access unless you're addressing someone in a mirror, I suppose, but I think that's sort of an odd. Can that expression be captured and expressed in modes of language and art with the help of another person? I mean, in conversation, there's some aspect of mirroring going on between two individuals. What is displaced in the gaze finds occupancy in our active language, both verbal and visual. This displacement secures our sense of being that is fostered by our grasp of language, and yet as we attempt to disclose the signified, we instead string ourselves along a chain of signifiers, laden with meaning that cannot be fully or faithfully accessed. And so far as the honest meaning of our words are charged with the duty to express our full being, we are doomed to some level of misapprehension, to the Tower of Babel of frustration in our conversation, which we still pursue insatiably. But perhaps looking for the perfect means of expression of the attempt to express all we are as subjects is a misguided project to begin with. Perhaps what we are able to convey in the gaps and silences and parallaxes that sink into the crevices between our gaze, our words, our hands, perhaps instead we can come to understand what is fundamentally other and unknown within our own subjectivity. The notion of otherness became the life work of Emmanuel Levinas, who Abe brought into his discussion of Ceylon. And I believe the notion of Levinas's face-to-face encounter speaks to what I'm hoping to explore in this exercise. Gazing upon one another accesses an asymmetrical otherness within one's own subjectivity. For Levinas, subjectivity swears allegiance to an otherness that is, quote, preliminary to all consciousness. Further, I hope to utilize the Lacanian recognition of desire and desire for recognition of the capital O other within the self. The human condition for Lacan is one of significance, not of signification. In his psychoanalytic theory, he strove to explicitly link, quote, metaphor to the question of being and metonymy to its lack. And so the activity that I'm going to propose is fundamentally a play with metonymy, with using different signifiers for trying to get at the same thing. What occurs when I displace and substitute your apprehension of my face, communicated to me through language, into a visual form. I wonder if it would be possible to posit what is lost between a gaze as a kind of lineman of the meontological, of something that's almost not being. That there is a nullity or a nothingness in that gap between what we perceive in ourselves and what we project. So I want to ask, does that void still in a way possess meaning? And are there playful and biological methods at accessing that meaning? So it was a big build up. So the procedure kind of goes like this. So 2 or more subjects. I think it's kind of up to you guys if you want to split into pairs or if you want to do it with more than 2 people. But pretty much 2 or more subjects designate one amongst themselves who will act as the artist of themselves, doing a self-portrait. But their role is only to receive. They draw a portrait of themselves in whatever artistic form they feel most comfortable, even if it's words written on, even if it's composing something on a page. But to as best they can, only use information and utterances given by those that observe the artist. At least one person must act as an observer, but I think it will also be really interesting if you want to introduce a dialogue among several people with an artist as their subject of conversation. So pretty much, say I was being the artist, I would have to draw a self-portrait only from utterances that those who observe me tell me.